All right, hello. I know it's been a little while, so thanks for coming back. I wanted to make another video about covert narcissists, since again, that was my most recent encounter. Um, and I just am intrigued by them still because of how thrown off I was in the beginning and thought that this one was completely different from my overt narcissist. So I just wanted to point out some more things in case some of you might be dealing with a covert. I specifically wanted to talk about some signs of emotional abuse, and then it really helped me at some point reading some specific phrases that they often use um, when they're being really manipulative, and it was just wild how many of them could have come right out of my narcissist's mouth. Um, so there really are these patterns, and I hope maybe it'll help some of you identify some of what's going on, because I felt really bad for a long time. I totally fell into thinking a lot of these things were my fault, and maybe I just wasn't being sensitive enough to this person's issues or whatever, but it's fake. So, first, of course, a lot of you will know this. One of the first signs of emotional abuse is definitely gaslighting. It aims to make you doubt your own sanity by saying that something that you remember very clearly never happened, or they'll say something that you know they said isn't real, or they aren't doing this thing that you know that they're doing that's abusive or sneaky. So there's that, and they'll just try to reframe everything to make you feel like you're crazy and you're overreacting when you are not. Stonewalling is another huge one that drove me really, really crazy, specifically with the covert narcissist. I got the silent treatment all the time. Sometimes it was put in terms of, like, she would say that she was just getting really overwhelmed by the conversation, and so she would say, "I have to go away now," and would just stop texting me back for like 5 hours. And even if it was not anything my fault at all, maybe I mentioned something that made her think of something from her childhood that she didn't want to think about, but she would make me think that it was my fault when really I had just made an innocent comment, like about something that happened at work, right? And then she would freak out and go away. So there was that kind. Also, it happened all the time when I was legitimately trying to bring up a concern that I had. Of course, you're not allowed to do that, right? So she has previously completely physically walked away, like left me at a street fair when I was trying to explain how hurtful it was that she was like going to visit her ex, right? Which is like pretty legitimate, and like wouldn't let me come with her. So like we had a plan to go out to California together, and then she decided that I couldn't come. And when I was like, okay, this is like really rough, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to feel about this, the fact that you need to be with your ex alone in another state, who you still talk to all the time and are still kind of hung up on, bringing that up, made her just completely walk away. So don't bring up any sort of emotional issues that you might have, because they're not valid and they're not her fault, and she's never going to take responsibility for them. So obviously this is so that they can be in control of the situation, because they're ignoring whatever assertion you're trying to make or stand up for yourself. They're avoiding taking responsibility again. And they also want to create a reaction out of you, right? So if they stop texting back, especially if they end it with some huge outrageous accusation against you, you're going to want to defend yourself in some way, or explain at least your side of the story, because of course none of this is true. So then you end up sending a bunch of texts and looking like a crazy person, which is exactly what they want. And I did that a lot. And the response that I always got was, of course, you never get like, "Oh, I hadn't seen it from your perspective." What I got was, "You're trying to explain away my feelings. You're making me invisible." How dramatic, right? I'm making you invisible, because instead of saying, "Oh, I totally agree that you should feel like I'm doing this thing I'm not doing, or being terrible in this way that I'm not, sorry," to try to actually have a conversation. So stonewalling and the silent treatment, awful. If you're getting that, that's not normal. That's not a healthy way to handle a conflict in a relationship. It's one thing if somebody says, "I'm having a really hard time with this thing. Like, I need to take a little bit of space, but I still care about you. I want to talk about this." In that way, that's different from just bam, gone, to make you feel bad on purpose. Another huge form of emotional abuse is the always playing the victim. I didn't know this was a thing so much with, I mean, I didn't know covert narcissists were a thing at all, but this is huge with them specifically. Overt narcissists, we'll do it sometimes too, but this is big. This was just constant with her, the covert. So they do this denial, contempt, reframing, and then re-blaming the person who presents the lie that they're telling. Like, of course, if you uncover something terrible that they're doing and then you say, hey, why are you doing that? Of course, they can never take responsibility for anything. So they will either look right in your face and just lie, or do this completely turning themselves into the victim thing. So again, it was the situation where she was constantly talking to her ex again all the time and not talking to me anymore, not being affectionate with me anymore, all this stuff, and was going out to California to like help her ex move, which was awful for me and so triggering, obviously, after having dealt with a narcissist previously. And of course, she knew that this was awful. And when I tried to bring up how it was really difficult to handle this whole situation and how I felt really distant from her and was really kind of not okay with it, she, of course, accused me of not being there emotionally for her while she was having this difficult time, missing her ex or whatever it was. So that was a really good one, right? Like, you're heavily emotionally cheating, which I found out. It wasn't like she told me this up front, of course. I found out because things got really weird. And then she had to turn it into somehow my fault, and I wasn't being emotionally supportive of her. So that was a really big one. And then there's also the using your own issues against you to turn into the victim again. So, like, if she did her research on the fact that like I have CPTSD, I have trust issues from previous relationships, and so she would use that against me, even if I just innocently would say like, "Oh, how was your AA meeting?" Because she's in AA, or like she would constantly get phone numbers from people in AA, which I know is normal, but like if you have CPTSD and trust issues, and then you suddenly see your girlfriend like texting a million new numbers, it's kind of like it doesn't feel that great, and especially since our trust was already weird because of this thing with her ex. So sometimes I would just innocently be like, "Oh, how was coffee?" If she just went, supposedly, I don't know, just went to coffee with someone from AA. An innocent question would get turned into that my issues are just too much for her to handle, and she was tired of having to defend herself, right? She basically thought that she should always be able to do whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted to, without talking to me about anything, ever, even if I kind of had trouble with it. So just like outrageously selfish, and yeah, of course, always the victim. They also make you feel abandoned and banished. This happened really a lot, of course, right at the time that she started talking to her ex again. I took a back seat to this person. She stopped calling and texting nearly as much. I used to sleep over there pretty much every night, and then suddenly it was like, I think we should spend a night apart, which of course was code for like, I'm going to spend hours talking to my ex on the phone, or whatever, other shady shit. I have no idea. But why would someone like suddenly decide to back off? And of course she would try to use, AA talk, right? Like, well, we didn't, we went too fast in the beginning, and we should have gone more slowly, which is totally true. But the way that you do it is not to suddenly start acting like you don't care to see someone and like you have just suddenly lost interest. But of course, again, that's intentional to make you start coming after them and questioning everything and kind of acting crazy so they can call you crazy. She also, started making plans on top of our plans with other people. It was just wild. So that brings me to double standards. She took a trip out to California again, a separate trip, and said that she was just going to be visiting family. And then midway through the trip said something like, oh, it just, I got kind of bored here, and at the very last second, I decided to actually go to Oakland, where that ex is from, to visit friends or like former coworkers. Maybe, but there were so many details that had to be sorted out with this trip, from how she was going to get there to who she was going to stay with to how she was going to get, back to her flight to come home. There's just no way that it was a last minute decision. And I knew that, of course. I assumed that she was going to go to Oakland as soon as she left here. But it was just really sneaky, and just that thing where you're like, you're twisting this. I know you're twisting this. And of course, when I confronted her about it, it was this huge ordeal, and I was having an unacceptable reaction, and I was being crazy just because I was like, I don't really know why you would lie about that, and now this makes everything so much worse. Like you said, you acknowledged that you needed to rebuild trust, and this is the opposite of the way to do it. So that happened, and she explained it away by saying like, well, this, it was my fault, right? She didn't want to make me mad or make me worry that she was going to go see that ex. So she like felt like she couldn't tell me, right? Because I'm crazy. And then the double standard comes in when I also took a trip while she was gone, because why not? And I went to see a friend in Minneapolis. And before I had decided that I was going to do that, that legitimately was a last minute decision. But I had told her I was considering it a couple days before. And then, she was gone and not talking to me very much. And on this like vacation that she took, while I was having kind of a hard time in life. So I decided to go see my friend, who she's met, by the way, not sketchy. And she got furious that when she texted what I was doing, finally, after like 5 hours of not texting, then she happens to text, and I said, oh, I'm on my way to Minneapolis, like I told you, I thought I decided to go, flipped her shit on me. Because then I was disrespecting her by not telling her that I had made that decision and that I was going to be driving. Okay? So I get no details of what is actually going on while she's out in California, but I should have told her that I was going to be driving the second that I left. Even though we were not in the middle of a conversation, there was hardly any communication from her at that point. My fault, right? And of course, kind of connected to the double standards, there's a lot of projecting that you might be seeing with these people too. It's wild. It's so many times I just felt like you actually took the thought right out of my head, and now you're using it against me. This is so interesting. A huge one was nothing I do is good enough. After just the smallest half-hearted attempt at making me feel like she even wanted to talk to me at all. And then if we ever got to a point where there was a huge lack of communication, and I would say, I'm starting to feel kind of distant from you. Nothing I do is good enough, and I called you this day, blah, blah, blah. She never called me while she was away unless I requested it, okay? And like, why is it a chore to talk to me? Why is it so much putting in effort? It was just, that one was wild. But over and over again, nothing I do is good enough, right? So that I'm supposed to then say, oh, no, it is. I know that you're trying really hard. And then I'm on the defensive because I've made her feel bad. Oh, of course. She also would say, you always tell me how I feel, and I never feel heard. I have countless examples of how she monitored my ability to respond to anything, right? I was never allowed to be angry. She flat out said it. I can't handle your anger. Right after she would do something so infuriating or something involving just a huge betrayal. And then, of course, I would get angry. And then, she would do the tone policing thing a lot, too. Like, we're in my apartment, and, like, you can't make my neighbors mad. After, do something terrible, don't let me react, make it my fault. Again, I'm crazy. It's just, the patterns. And I never feel heard. How many of us who've been with a narcissist have not ever felt heard? Because you're not. They cannot empathize with you. So it's just wild when she would turn that on me in a context where, she was trying to be the victim. And again, I would try to explain myself and what was going on with me and how I felt. And because I was trying to explain something, I was not hearing her again. right? I was not validating her completely outrageous feelings and the shit that she made up in her head. So I was just bad. And you make everything my fault. Again, whoa, that's exactly what you're doing. How are you putting this on me? And then she could also suddenly like make everything about the things I did wrong. When the conversation is about her cheating on me, the wildest thing, the wildest type of projection was when, again, there was that whole situation with the ex and going to visit the ex. And after she came back, I was like sort of trying to sort out what the truth was and whether this ex was ever going to be out of the picture. And I hadn't quite labeled her a narcissist yet, so I was really confused. And basically, in talking about whether or not we were going to try to make the relationship work again, she started throwing out demands and about ways that I needed to change my behavior if she was going to be willing to come back. Like, okay, so that one again was just completely wild. Like, I was supposed to be the one saying, if I'm going to take you back, like, there have to be these boundaries between you and this person, and you have to try to rebuild trust and all these like really normal things. But instead it was, well, I'm going to make this list of ways that, you need to change and you need to stop being controlling and, for asking how coffee was, right? That sort of thing. Okay, so here's the part about common phrases that covert narcissists use in various situations. And I bet you'll recognize some because this is wild. So right after they've broken a promise, what I got a lot was, well, I can't predict the future. Like, she told me again that this fucking ex, she was working up to blocking her, right? Because of course it wasn't her fault that she was like responding to all these texts and letting her in her life. It was the other girl's fault because she like wouldn't let it go or whatever, wasn't over it. There's a huge projection. You were the one that wasn't over it, and didn't want to let go of the attention, of course, the supply. So when we came to the date that it was way past the date that she said she was going to have this girl blocked, and she clearly didn't because she was still like hiding her phone. And I mean, I saw when the girl would call, like it was definitely still happening. Then she would say, well, I can't predict the future. Like, I know I told you this thing, right? A definite thing, like a date, but I'm going to get out of it by saying that. Or a lot of the times, it would come up in a conversation where like we definitely had made a plan. We were going to hang out. We knew what we were going to do. Maybe sometimes we hadn't like picked a time, but that's really not critical to this argument. So then she would say things like, well, oh, that came up in conversation, but we never really had a plan. So that if she had made plans on top of it, or if she had just decided for some reason that she didn't want to do something anymore, or if she was being sketchy, she would say that wasn't really a plan. And that also happened when she came back from that second California trip for weeks. She was gone for 3 weeks, and we had talked about how I was going to pick her up from the airport, and that's something that's important to me. And then seriously at 2 a.m. while she was on the plane heading home, she decided that she didn't want to be picked up. And so I was just like, how, like, that's been a thing. No, it was never really a plan. We kind of talked about it. And I was like, that's why I asked what time you were coming back. We definitely said I was going to be there. And then, of course, I was like, is someone else picking you up? Like, what other reason would you have for wanting to take an Uber from the airport at like 7 a.m. when you get in, right? Besides, you're lying. So that was odd. And then, another phrase that got thrown at me a lot was like, I don't need a guilt trip for having anxiety, right? Or for having to work. And those were reasons that she would send me away. So on that same day, I got told I couldn't pick her up from the airport. And then we were definitely going to hang out. I came over, and I was there for maybe only about an hour. She started trying to pick a fight, just over and over again about things that had happened, like there just weren't issues, of course, while she was gone, because I had said that I felt distant for a couple of days in there at some point, and that was enough, criticism from me that I just had to leave. Um, and then when I was like, man, I I'm really sad because I thought like I finally get to see you after 3 weeks. Well, I don't need a guilt trip about this because I have to work and we should have communicated about it better, but we never really had this plan. And I just have a lot of anxiety right now. It was just always the excuse, right? My anxiety would get held against me in the form of PTSD, but she could use her anxiety for either giving me the silent treatment or kicking me out of her apartment or whatever it was. Um, so the accusation of a guilt trip from me when really I was just saying I was hurt that you are suddenly not going to hang out with me and not even talk to me the rest of the day, the first day that you're back from a trip. Um, Another classic one is when they have they like should have a feeling or they should be owning up to something because you've just brought up an issue. They'll say, I don't know what to say because they don't. They don't have the feeling that someone else might have who can feel empathy or who gives a shit. And yeah, they just don't know what to say. So I got that one in these same conversations too. You know, got roped into her saying she was the victim and she had just tried so hard to keep in touch with me while she was gone for 3 weeks. And the fact that I had said that I was distant, you know, meant that I was so high maintenance or whatever. And in response to that, in response to me saying, you know, I don't think any of this is a huge issue. This is why I said this. The usual explanation that I got, I don't know what to say. Um, so that was like how she cut that one off. When getting angry that I wanted to define the relationship, that was another thing. Um, Ever since the ex came back into the picture, and we were like working through some stuff, but of course she wasn't. Um, I kept, of course, kind of freaking out. Someone with CPTSD dealing with someone who also feels like they're pushing you away a whole lot. Um, Talking to God knows who, you know, making all these plans on top of your plans. Of course, you're going to want for her to at least say that she's your girlfriend, right? Because otherwise, she can be going and dating other people and doing anything. And of course, that would be a perfect setup, right, for me to not even be allowed to complain. Like, well, we're not together, so. And so then, of course, I got this. This one is another kind of classic one, like something along the lines of, well, there are a lot of different types of relationships or a lot of different types of love. And she would always say, I don't know why you insist on a label. Like, labels don't change anything about how I feel about you. And you want everything on your terms, which is just another huge projection. Everything was on her terms. When I could come over, you know, what plans were actually going to get followed through or not. So that you want everything on your terms. It just kills me. Yeah, I already mentioned the nothing I ever do is good enough constantly after a very half-hearted attempt at something, or really no attempt at all. When you express a concern, a lot of the time I got, you know, why do you have to be living in the past? Because the past is directly defining how I feel about this situation, and you haven't done any work to rebuild trust or change how I feel about this, so that's why. But also, I would get accused of future tripping a lot. You know, just live in the moment, and like some of that I think seems to come from AA, and that can be useful for sure at certain times. But when it's used against you for when you're trying to predict issues, like when I was saying, like, are you gonna go date other people? Like, I need to know what's going on here. Just live in the moment, you know. Why are you so worried about like when or if I'm ever gonna want to call you my actual girlfriend? Right? Don't ask me why I was even communicating with this person for as long as I was. Shithead. Another thing that was huge was she would kind of make up triggers. Like, triggers are a very legitimate, serious thing that your partner definitely should consider. But triggers are things, you know, anything from like a smell, a visual, something somebody says that takes you back to a moment of trauma. And I have those, and I had shared some of those with her, and I felt like I was keeping mine really pretty well in check, actually. but then she would just make them up in order to not have to discuss things that she just didn't want to discuss. So she made up a trigger about how this ex, the same one she couldn't stop talking to, was having a hard time at her job, turned into kind of a miserable person, apparently. And so that meant that I was never, ever allowed to talk about any of my jobs in a way that wasn't completely positive. How are you ever going to live with someone that way? And she would tell me, well, just go talk to somebody else about that. And I still sort of don't understand what even the problem was. Why would it be difficult for you to accept that I am having a very negative experience with this job, or even this job application? The job didn't even have to be mine. I mentioned once that I was worried I hadn't gotten called yet about when I was going to come in and do an interview. And she freaked out and gave me the silent treatment because I wasn't allowed to be talking about the topic of a job. So that one's just super interesting. Another phrase that would often come up whenever I would say that, I was feeling distant, or when I wasn't quite sure why she canceled our plans or seemed to not care about me anymore, she would always say, you shouldn't need reassurance. When she was in California, it was the same thing. You should just know how I feel. And if you're not hearing from me, it doesn't mean that I feel any differently. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, maybe if people had been together for a lot of years and had really good trust, maybe that would be the case, but this was not the case with us. So then again, it was on me. I was being a problem because I wanted her to talk about how she felt about me occasionally so that I could feel okay. Another phrase is, if you knew the truth, you wouldn't be upset. You just don't understand, and it's not what you think. And I got that one about this ex that she was communicating with. It's just completely not what you think. Well, you talk constantly, all throughout the day on GChat, and she calls you all the time, and you talk about things that you're both very passionate about that I cannot contribute to because I don't know about the topic. So that's definitely threatening, and how could it be not what I think? So that's, again, just, to sort of dismiss this very legitimate concern that you have. And then, of course, the really good one is whenever you misbehave or bring up something that you shouldn't. That's what I mean by misbehaving. You defend yourself, bring up something they're doing that's completely heinous, and you don't want them to do it, heaven forbid. Then you get the, I just can't fight for this anymore. That is actually how everything ended. Was, she got back from the trip, was being completely awful, kicked me out, wouldn't hang out with me, gave me the silent treatment for most of the first day that she was back, and then a second day as well. And I fell into the trying to fix it, trying to say that, we didn't have to have this disagreement. I didn't really understand why we were fighting. It felt like she was trying to start a fight, because of course she was. And then it ended with, 6 hours after I texted all these really nice things and actually asked a question about how is it that you don't feel supported? Because that got thrown at me again too, right? You don't support anything that I do, and you're just never excited for me. Okay, weird. Then I said, I care about that very much. What do you think I should be doing that I'm not doing? Or what do you not feel supported in? Which is crap. I shouldn't have said that because I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong. But then I got the, I just can't fight for this anymore. As if you ever were, right? I was the one fighting tooth and nail to try to figure out how to make this work in any way. And then I sorted out what it was. Pretty sure. So it was just so odd that she had been pretending to be excited to come back to me from this trip for 3 whole weeks, and then lost her mind when she wouldn't let me pick her up and wouldn't hang out and stuff. So I was like, something is off. It's always off, but something is really happening here. So we had met on a dating site. So I went back on the dating site and I checked. Previously, she had completely taken down her profile, and so it said, this user no longer exists. But when I checked, it said this user is no longer available, and her profile picture was there again. When it said this user no longer exists, there wasn't even a picture. So I was like, cool. Those days that I was complaining about you being distant, you were totally grooming somebody else. And then you came back and you probably wanted to actually have a date with her, which is why you wouldn't hang out with me and gave me the silent treatment on Saturday. Like, picked a fight, said that you had to work suddenly, and said that you were anxious and made terrible excuses for not wanting to see me. So, I would love to hear more. If you have phrases that you heard over and over and over again and you want to compare with other people, put them in the comments. I want to hear them too, because I'm sure there are more that I'm forgetting, and I would just feel better seeing them. Thank you again for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.